All right, Eric, I want to talk to you about the 1996 Texas Rangers. We are now in 2026, which means it's been 30 years since the first ever playoff team in franchise history. So, before I guess we get into some specifics, 30 years later, what are the prevailing feelings or thoughts that still stand out about that team or that
Oh, I
year?
think I think the friendships on that team, the camaraderie on that team was probably the best that I can remember with any club. And it extended to the 25th player on the team and even extended to the media. You know, back then the Rangers had never been in the playoffs before, and it was such a rush of relief and exhilaration for the Rangers to finally make the playoffs. And of course, they did it in the most unorthodox fashion possible, clinching by Seattle losing rather than by the Rangers winning a game.
So, what do you remember about that night and the Rangers clinching?
First of all, I remember it was cold. We were bundled up wearing jackets, and the game went to extra innings and went so long that the Seattle game out on the West Coast ended before our game did. Brad Sham was my partner then, and he was actually doing the play by play when it flashed on the scoreboard that the Mariners had lost, which meant the Rangers had clinched first place and their first playoff spot. And Brad gave me the honor of actually saying the Texas Rangers have won the American League West and are in the playoffs for the first time, which was really gracious of him to do. But I do remember the Rangers ultimately lost the game, and Garrett Anderson, who was a real Ranger nemesis over the years for the Angels, had 6 hits in that game. And nobody can ever remember that because it was the night the Rangers won the division by losing while Seattle was winning.
Now, the 95 season was a little abbreviated because of the strike. So it was only a 144 game season. The Rangers finished 74 and 70. They finished third in the AL West. Obviously, could hit the ball, but pitching was in question. At what point did you think that the 96 team had a chance to make the playoffs and win the division? Was it before the year in spring training? Was it only once the season got going? What do you remember about that?
It wasn't in spring training, I'll tell you that. The Rangers were really high on their former number one draft pick, Benji Gill, who was going to come up from the minors and be their shortstop. And he got hurt in spring training. He hurt his back, would wind up missing the whole season, as I recall. And that seemed like a death blow at the time. The Rangers didn't seem to have a lot of depth behind them. They had Kurt Stillwell, veteran utility player, Kevin Elster, who was attempting to make a comeback and clearly had aged quite a bit. And there really didn't seem to be a great fill-in candidate. As it turned out, Elster had a fantastic comeback year and helped lead the Ranger offense. But the first week of the season, the Rangers went undefeated. And that's when we realized that this team might have something special. It started on opening day. Ken Hill, who the Rangers had acquired in the offseason, went out and outpitched Roger Clemens. Craig Worthington filled in for the injured Dean Palmer, or maybe it was the sick Dean Palmer. I think he just missed that opening day game and actually hit a home run. It was kind of a Cinderella story from the start, but the Rangers swept their opening homestand, and we started thinking this team could be special.
Yeah, beating the Red Sox, beating the Yankees, right? Not just
Yeah.
not just any teams. The Yankees would obviously be a part of the story at the end of the year. We I think it's tough sometimes to separate how we feel about certain players prior to or during a given year. Like you think of Pudge, you just think of Hall of Fame catcher, one of the greatest to ever do it. He was unbelievable. But I don't know that, I remember, and I was so young at the time, but going into the 96 season, what the feeling was about Juan Gonzalez. I mean, you did just share what the feeling was about Kevin Elster, who was, one of the main supporting actors on that team. But, that wasn't necessarily the expectation going into the year. But did you look at that lineup with Pudge and Will Clark and Juan Gonzalez and Mickey Tettleton and think, wow, like this team has one of the best lineups in baseball? Or at the time, did you think, hey, this is a really good lineup, but I just don't know if it's good enough?
Now, we thought the lineup would be great. We had no doubt about that. especially if Elster was going to deliver any offense at all from the number 9 spot. I think he wound up hitting 27 home runs. But we definitely felt that they would score a lot of runs. The question, as always with the Rangers, was going to be the pitching. And as it turned out, it was, partially the bullpen and partially, an offensive falling off in the playoffs that kept the Rangers from advancing over the Yankees in the first round. But the starting rotation was really solid. They had two number one starters, really. Uh, and, Ken Hill and John Burkett were aces. John Burkett was acquired near the trading deadline. Doug Melvin, who was the general manager, also got the bullpen bolstered. He picked up Mike Stanton. And ultimately, the Ranger bullpen wasn't quite good enough. They were so unreliable, if that's the word, going into the playoffs, that Johnny Oates let Darren Oliver start the ninth inning in Game 3 of the playoffs with a 2-1 lead. Partially, I think, because he really didn't trust anybody in the bullpen more than he trusted Darren Oliver, even though he'd pitched 8 innings at the time. So it really did come down at the end to, once again, Ranger pitching not being good enough. But the offense definitely suffered in that series, too. The big guns, other than Juan Gonzalez and Pudge, did not deliver at all in the playoffs.
And Juan helped the Rangers win their first playoff game. He was outstanding in the postseason. What do you remember about Juan during that series, even in defeat?
Yeah, he hit a home run in every game. And in one of the games, he actually hit a long foul ball down the left field line at the ballpark. And the fireworks were shot off because it looked like a home run. As it turned out, it was a foul ball. And everybody was hugely disappointed until Juan hit a home run later in the at-bat. I don't know if it was the very next pitch, but later in that at-bat, he hit another home run. I think he hit 5 home runs in the 4-game series. But Pudge, I think, was the only other Ranger who batted over 250 in that series, as the bats of everybody else, pretty much went dead.
What was it like over the course of the year as fans started to get wind that this team was pretty good? Did you start to notice a different atmosphere? Were you experiencing things that maybe you hadn't seen from Rangers fans, given that there was something at stake that the team hadn't accomplished?
Yeah, definitely, because the Rangers were in first place pretty much the whole second half. It was their job to hold off Seattle. But the Rangers were the front runners in the second half, and people got really excited. People also got very nervous as the Ranger lead, which had been up to 8 games, started shrinking, and eventually went all the way down to 1 game with a week to go in the season after the Rangers lost all 4 games of a 4-game series in Seattle the next to the last week of the season, and then lost the first game of a 3-game series in Anaheim when they blew a lead in the 10th inning of a game. And people were definitely very into it. They sometimes bail out on the Rangers in the second half if they're not doing that well. But with the Rangers in first place in the second half, everybody was behind this team.
And then the postseason, what was it like that first? I know it didn't end well for the Rangers. They ended up running into the juggernaut Yankees, who used the Rangers as a springboard in 96, 98, and 99 on their way to World Series titles. But what do you just remember about the excitement and how you were feeling, or how much pride the team maybe felt in being the first team to make the playoffs and win the division? Like, what do you remember about all of those firsts and how they all tie together?
Yeah, the team was very aware of the fact that they were the first Ranger team to make the playoffs. Johnny Oates was the manager. He was generally a calming type of field general who was very predictable in his moves, but knew how to run a clubhouse and let the veterans like Will Clark and Mickey Tettleton, for example, run the clubhouse. And I remember the first game of the playoffs better than anything because the Rangers actually won that one at Yankee Stadium, their first ever playoff game. John Burkett pitched a complete game, won, and I think Dean Palmer also hit a home run, if I'm not mistaken. And in Game 2, the Rangers had a lead, couldn't hold it, lost in extra innings. Game 3, Rangers had a 2-1 lead going to the 9th, couldn't hold it, lost the game 3-2. And then Game 4, the Rangers had a 4-0 lead early in the game, couldn't hold it. and lost the game. So clearly, pitching was a big part of it, as the bullpen just was unable to hold leads.
Eric, I think you think of some of the managers who have had success with the Rangers from like a postseason standpoint. Ron Washington was just a guy that players loved and they'd run through a brick wall. I think of Jeff Bannister, especially in 2015 when the team started 8-16 on the heels of that dreadful 2014 season. He never lost confidence and he had his never ever quit mantra that I think really kind of was adopted by the players. In 2023, when the Rangers were starting to slide in the second half, Bruce Bochy was just as calm as could be. What was Johnny Oates' role? How did he make a difference in that 96 team?
Yeah, I guess you'd say that his calm was probably helpful. Staying out of the way was probably helpful at that point. He didn't overreact. He didn't make drastic changes. He wasn't one of those guys. It's interesting though that when the Rangers broke that losing streak the next to the last week of the season, after the lead had gotten down to one game, they played a day game after a night game in Anaheim, and Johnny decided to let Dave Valley catch instead of Pudge, which was an interesting move for a crucial game like that. And Valley hit a home run, and Valley was one of the inspirational leaders of the team, made a legendary speech to the team one night in Detroit when the Rangers' lead was shrinking, challenging each player to be his very best over the final 5 or 6 weeks of the season. And it really inspired the team. And then Valley hit the big home run in that game that ended the losing streak. But it was a decision by Johnny Oates to play Valley that day that actually led to that victory.
All right, so let's talk about that speech. That's one of the more talked about speeches, I guess, in franchise history. What do you remember about all that?
I just remember that, we as the media were outside the locker room and, not allowed in there. And then afterwards, talking to some of the players, Dennis Cook, who was one of the left-handed relievers on the team, said, I am so excited. I'm going home and I'm going to sleep in my uniform. He was so committed to the Rangers from that point on. That was just an example of how much Valley's speech had moved the needle, and woke these guys up a little bit. And if I'm not mistaken, that was also the week that John Burkett was acquired by the Rangers from Florida. And Burkett showed up in Toronto a couple of days later and pitched a complete game shutout in his first game as a Ranger. At the Rogers Center in Toronto. I guess we were calling it Skydome at that time, but that was also one of the turning points of the season.
Do you recall what the message was in Dave Valley's speech?
Yeah, the message was we have to commit to each other to be the very best we can be over the next 6 weeks, to give every single thing we have for the team. And he challenged each individual player. He went around the room and challenged each individual player. And it's interesting, for Valley to do this as the backup catcher, a guy who played, I don't know, maybe he played 30 games that year. For him to do that was, really special, really inspirational.
Any final thoughts on the 96 Rangers? I mean, I know we could talk about that team, I'm sure, for hours, but, anything important that you think, is vital to consider when reflecting on that team?
I don't know how important it is, but here it is 30 years later, and I've got a memory that has some holes in it now, but I think I can name the entire 25-man roster of that team, which is incredible. I don't think
there's a try.
All right, let's give it a try. We've got Will Clark at first, Mark McLemore at second, Kevin Elster at short, Dean Palmer at third, Rusty Greer in left, Darrell Hamilton in center, Juan Gonzalez in right, Mickey Tettleton as the DH. You have Pudge as the catcher. Then you've got Dave Valley as the backup catcher. You have Rene Gonzalez as a backup infielder, Kurt Stillwell as a backup infielder. I think Mike Sims was on that team as a backup outfielder, first baseman.
So Mike Sims, I think, might have been the next year because Damon Buford was on that team.
Okay, Damon Buford was the extra outfielder.
And then there's another person who had a great nickname, backup outfielder.
I'm not thinking of that one.
Wasn't Warren Newson, was it the Deacon?
Oh, the Deacon. Yeah, the Deacon, Warren Newson, left-handed pinch hitter.
And then,
Yes.
okay, so John Burkett was one of the starters. Who were the 5 starters before Burkett was acquired?
Well, we had Ken Hill, Darren Oliver, Bobby Witt, Roger Pavlik.
Who was an all-star that year.
Yeah, he had a very high ERA, but an incredible one-loss record.
Yep.
And I think Kevin Gross began the year as the 5th starter.
That's correct. The closer?
The closer was Mike Henneman. Jeff Russell was the 8th inning guy. Then there were 3 lefties. There was Ed Vosberg, Mike Stanton, and Dennis Cook. And there were 1 or 2 other righties who I'm not remembering right now.
That's that's still pretty incredible. So, did you mention Gil Heredia a second ago?
No, missed Gil Heredia. He got some starts too.
Yep, Gil Heredia and Mark Brandenburg had a few appearances. Matt Whiteside, but not much. I mean, you pretty much nailed it. That's pretty
incredible. You know, yeah. I can't name you the 25 guys on the Rangers World Series teams in 2010 or 2011. Yeah. I probably can't even name all 26 guys from 2023, but I can give you that 96 team without any trouble.
That's awesome. Well, Eric, thanks so much for taking some time to reflect. I'm sure we'll have more conversations throughout the year, as this is the 30th anniversary of the first ever team. And I know for some folks, listen, I know the 2023 team will always be special, but I know for some Rangers fans, that 96 team will always hold a really special place in their heart, just because it was an experience that Rangers fans had not had the chance to experience before. So
the electricity in the ballpark for those games was incredible. The fans were on their feet the entire game for both home games, a Friday night game followed by a noon game the next day, and the fans were on their feet the whole time.
That's awesome. Thanks so much, Eric.
Sure thing.